Governments around the world routinely issue debt to finance the construction of public infrastructure such as schools, highways, and water systems. Basic idea is to align costs and revenues with the receipt of services over time. But an excessive reliance on borrowing can be particularly problematic for local governments as they face high debt service costs, and in the most extreme cases, sovereign defaults can occur. The Center for Finance and Policy at MIT recently took a hard look at local government borrowing in China and found that aggregate indebtedness is approaching 40% of GDP, a high share of the economy, particularly when compared to the U.S., where our most indebted states have debt to local GDP ratios in the mid-20s. But the situation in China is not at a crisis stage. The central government has taken action in recent years aimed at ameliorating the impact of these growing debt loads. For instance, they've shut down some rather opaque financing channels that have been used in recent years, and they've also swapped out some high-cost short-term debt for lower-cost, longer-term bonds for local governments. These actions suggest the possibility, and perhaps even the likelihood, that the central government will step in with local governments to the extent that any run into problems they can't manage on their own. This study from CFP also pointed to a structural budgetary imbalance on the part of local governments, in that they're responsible for funding about 80% of local expenditures, yet have access to only half of the tax revenues coming in. How they closed the fiscal gap is an open question. To the extent that they're borrowing, they're resolving their gap problem at the expense of exacerbating their debt loads. Finally, it's important to note that China's situation is complex. They're seeking to move from a government-dominated economic model to a market-oriented one. And how they manage local fiscal imbalances in the years going forward will really be telling in terms of their commitment to the reforms needed to accomplish that goal.